Hey everybody, welcome back to another Bald Movies. This one is a Bald Move prestige joint. It's The Hunt for Red October from 1990, the Cold War submarine spy thriller, directed by John McTiernan, which you might recognize as helming some of the best 80s action movies of all time. I'm talking Predator, I'm talking Die Hard, Die Hard with a Vengeance. It's based on a screenplay by Larry Ferguson and Donald Stewart, which is based on a best-selling novel by Tom Clancy. Which I am a huge fan of this movie, and I'm totally in the tank for this movie and for the book. I can't wait to talk about it. It stars Sean Connery, Alec Baldwin, Scott Glenn, James Earl Jones, Sam Neill, Tim Curry, Stellan Skarsgård, and I have to mention it, even though it's a very, very minor role, Gates McFadden.
Yep.
Dr. Crusher of the Next Generation fame, who she got done dirty by Star Trek, and then by this production, and then by a future production. It's quite a tale that I uncovered.
Really?
And also,
Okay.
most importantly, Sean Connery's $20,000 hairpiece, allegedly. There's a whole tale about that too.
It looks good, I gotta say. Like
I think that Sean Connery has to owe his 1990 People Magazine Sexiest Man Alive nomination to this $20,000 toupee.
Yeah.
Because it just takes him right to Silver Fox territory.
Mhm.
How do you keep your hands off of him?
Would you pay 20 grand to be people's sexiest man alive?
No, but having hair that good in my advancing
Okay.
years, yeah, that's probably worth it. It's probably worth it.
I
where
gotta
do you
say
want
also before, to preface this podcast, that nothing of what you're about to hear ever happened.
No.
So just
It's
keep that in
been
mind.
disavowed by the U.S. and former Soviet governments.
It's funny that you
It's
mentioned that,
deemed
actually.
too hot to handle.
Because like the former Soviet governments, this movie it came out at a weird time because this whole story revolves around, this Soviet era government doing these shady things with their submarines and tricking the Americans. And it was about to release in a time where the Soviet government had just been essentially, like, the Cold War was ending. It was essentially over because the government had fallen, the Communist Party was ousted, and like,
Sure.
so the text that they put in the beginning of this film is there specifically for that reason.
Right. Because there was some pre-production problems with like Sean Connery dismissing this, being like, oh, the Soviets launching a new submarine, it's just unrealistic. And like throwing it in the pile, and they're like, no, it's actually takes place in 1984, see?
Yeah.
But I don't know. It's interesting because it is weird that because something happened like in current year, that something that was entirely plausible and gripping that could have happened just a year ago would suddenly the public have no interest in. I think that's wild,
I think they made the right call though. Like, just do something minor to just lampshade that and be done with it. Like,
right.
But still release the movie, obviously.
Yeah. But it's just funny. It's like, what if the Chernobyl miniseries came out a year after Chernobyl when they got to sarcophagus and everything was pretty, quote unquote cool. It's like, who gives a shit anymore? Chernobyl's yesterday's news. Got to wait 30 years to produce that thing.
Yeah, it's weird. Like you would even care about that. I mean, this is a fictional work. This could be, the Martians, like this could be The Expanse, right? The Martians and the Earthers, and like, who gives a shit if it's true to life? But I guess Tom Clancy tries to do these very realistic political thrillers.
Yes.
And so
rip from the headlines, or even predicting the headlines. He did like 15 years before 9/11, he wrote a story about a disgruntled a separatist kind of faction crashing a jetliner into the Capitol building. He kind of has a way of reading tea leaves and coming up with plausible things that later turn out to be true. In fact, one of the legends is like when Hunt for Red October was first published, it caused a lot of consternation in the Pentagon, because they're like, who the fuck cleared this project? Like, this has got entirely too much accurate information about, submarine warfare tactics, technology, capabilities, and it's stuff that like Tom Clancy had just, because he's interested in this, did a lot of research, talked to a lot of sub boat skippers. Maybe some of them are a little bit too loose tongued, and he maintained he got all this stuff from essentially public sources.
Yeah.
And also, I guess this movie blew up the U.S. Navy's spot on, like, it wasn't public information that we were using gravitational sensors in addition to sonar to, like, detect anomalies underwater and navigate. And there's a throwaway line about, like, the GravMev sensor saying this, that, or another, and that one line, like, I don't know, cost like Lockheed Martin $1 billion or something because
wow.
That was super secret technology. But I do wonder, like, well, how the hell did that get out then? Like, somebody said something. Loose ships, sink sonars or something.
Lips. Yep.
Sink lips. God. But yeah, this is one of my, like I said, this is one of my all-time favorite movies. This is what made me a Tom Clancy fan, because I saw this and I'm like, I'm going to read the book behind it. And the book is just, is first of all, this is one of the top 5 most faithful adaptations of a book. You can throw Lord of the Rings on there. You can throw The Godfather, The Martian. We're talking about Martians and stuff. That's as far as faithful adaptations of a book to a movie. Very little is lost. There's a few changes for, like, Hollywood, and there's a couple of simplifications. But Hunt for Red October, unlike most of Tom Clancy's books, is only like 350 pages.
Oh,
like,
wow.
Red Storm Rising is like 1,000 pages or some shit like that. But this one's a pretty brisk tome. And if you like this movie and you like reading, I highly recommend the book, because the book is just this, only with more detail, more characterization, lots more technical stuff about spycraft and submarine warfare. But the essential story and what happens is pretty much the same. Yeah, and it's very, very accessible.
You were telling me a couple days ago or something, when we were talking about this podcast, that the book has like some scenes about I guess more stuff about them being chased or like maybe pre stealing the sub stuff, where they're just kind of going into like subs, sinking into the depths and how deep they can go and what it feels like to do that. And I was thinking, man, that seems like it would be a valid entry in this film and really help the audience understand, like, the dangers that they're in. But stakes, after watching it, I feel like that was a smart cut, because they never really go to what every other submarine movie does, which is like, we're going deep, the sub might cave in on itself,
we're approaching crush depth, everyone. Right. They do a little bit when Dallas gets the order to kill the Red October, and they do like an emergency dive to like 1,000 meters, and you can hear the hull popping and settling, but like, it's well within the sub's capabilities.
Right.
Only Ryan's freaking out because he's the guy that's never been on a sub. Everybody else is like cool as a cucumber, because
and they don't dwell on it.
It's like a F-16 pilot breaking a sound barrier. It's like, that's just Tuesday for them. But if you're a civilian, you're in the back, hyperventilating and throwing up in your pouch and all that kind of stuff. So
so smart cut.
And that's one of the reasons I think this works really well too, is because you've got this character, Jack Ryan, who's a very smart, capable person, but he's an everyman. He's even got military experience, but the submarine stuff is alien. And him, like, entering this world and being, it's a series of his investigations in the first act of the movie is all about him, like, going to various experts and being like, look at this picture. What is this picture? What could this be? And they explain to him, which explains to us, like, why this is a threat.
I feel like Tom Clancy wants to be Jack Ryan, right? He's the analyst, and the analyst is like, absolutely. He's in the perfect position to be that sort of everyman with just a shitload of knowledge and the ability to connect every dot that he finds. Because he can go into any situation, and since he's not a field operative or somebody who is in the military organization or whatever, he's not going to know a lot of stuff, but he also knows a shitload of stuff because he has access to a lot of information. So it makes for like Jack Ryan being able to get into any situation really quickly with a small amount of updating.
Yeah, just a digression on the Ryan verse. He is very much a Mary Sue. Like, this guy, I mean, this was well known as conservative pornography back in the 80s and 90s, and I didn't care because I was conservative and I fucking loved it. But like, this guy is constructed to be like the perfect conservative hero. He came from a modest background, Irish Catholic upbringing, joined the Marines, but didn't wash out. He actually had a severe back injury from a helicopter training crash that almost crippled him. He fought back from that, then became a financial analyst and like won a fortune on Wall Street. Retired from that to become a professor of like obscure military history, and was always just forced into these positions. And, like unlike most politicians that like want to get to the next rung, he was always like pushed up the ladder and like damning and fucking everyone around him. Like, I don't give a, like, I'll tell to the president of the United States that he's full of shit and he's wrong and he's unconstitutional, because I don't want that job. But somehow, you'll never guess, by the end of the Ryan verse, Jack Ryan sits in the Oval Office as the president through some crazy. He saves the prince and princess while he's visiting in England and becomes a knight. Like, it's just all this amazing conservative wish fulfillment. But they're really, really, despite all that, really gripping, interesting tales. Like, I'd recommend Red Storm Rising in particular and Hunt for Red October to anyone. Patriot Games is really good. Yeah. Cardinal and the Kremlin is just like one of the best pure spy novels I've ever read. So yeah, like I said, I'm in the tank. I still, have enough affection for this character in this role that like I've actually been thinking about rereading the Tom Clancy books again.
Because that'll take a lifetime.
The thing is like, it's also widely known that Tom Clancy didn't write Tom Clancy books much past like the fourth or fifth one, if he ever wrote them at all. Like they were ghost written by this guy who's, the actual writer, and Tom would just send him dossiers of like, here are the set pieces and situations and technology and the geopolitical stuff. You go write all the dialogue and characterizations and whatnot.
They slap his name on it. He does that with video games too, or did.
Well, and once you get there's a couple like, I think The Bear and the Dragon is where the novels take a real nosedive in quality, and I stopped reading when he tried to because Jack got too old. He was a president. What the hell are you going to do with him? And then they rebooted it, essentially the series, with it's Jack Ryan's son doing all the same shit, and I'm like, this is stupid. This is getting off. And then he died a couple years ago. So
quite a few.
But yeah, Hunt for Red October, the film. It's a great adaptation of this novel and it has everything that's great in it. And I just think it's amazing how well they do introducing people that don't know anything about like submarines into this world. And like they do a lot of smart tricks because it's inherently hard to keep track of these characters, but they do things with the lighting scheme. Like, Hunt for Red October has a muted blue like lighting scheme. The Dallas has kind of like a reddish hued scheme. I forget the Russian attack sub that is commanded by one of Ramius's mentorees. It's got a green lighting scheme. So as you go from boat to boat to boat, immediately. Without having to look at the uniforms or the faces, immediately, oh, this is the American boat. This is the quote unquote good guy Russian boat. This is the bad guy Russian boat. They do things, like I said, introduce, the technology from a perspective of an expert that's lecturing a person who's not an expert. So that, and the idea that like, Jack doesn't really know what he's doing. So like he's protesting, like, having to ship out to this aircraft carrier, and it allows you to easily follow the action. And since this outsider is central to the action, every time, he usually asks the audience question, like, what the hell are we doing? And the submarine captain can essentially turn to the camera and tell you what's happening. And I don't know. As I'm describing it, I feel like I'm describing a bad, flawed movie, but I hadn't seen this movie in about 5-6 years. But I really had a good time watching it again. How many times have you seen this movie, and what did you think? Just kind of spoiler free.
This is either my second or third time seeing it. And I absolutely don't think this is a bad movie. I think this is nearly perfect. I think there are some questions I have, which we'll get to here in a little bit, around why they did certain things the way they did. But yeah, I found it very easy to follow. And part of it was probably down to those visual cues that they were giving us. But also, there's a little bit of a worry up front when I see Sean Connery trying to do a Russian accent. Like, I'm thinking, oh shit, this is Highlander. right? This is an Egyptian with a Scottish accent doing English.
Egyptian Spaniard, yeah.
Right, right. But then they very quickly moved past that, and I was grateful for it. And all the things you're talking about, where they're catching the audience up to speed on the world of submarines, naval combat, and stuff. They're really economical in the way that they approach that, and I appreciated it, especially because this movie comes in at just slightly over 2 hours with credits. It's like 2:10, something like that.
It moves.
Yeah, and I feel like there is a remarkable amount of action and story that takes place in those 2 hours.
Well, even I'm thinking the credit sequence is just hustle. This movie is a hustle and bustle from the jump. Like it's all you join this the action. Red October is going out to sea. Then you go to Jack Ryan and he's like frantically packing and getting onto a plane, and it's kind of like a very subdued Indiana Jones in that there's very little transition, slow pieces. It's always just action is logically propelled to the next action, and it happens again and again and again and again, and then the movie's over.
And Jack Ryan is as the audience is always one step sort of behind the Captain Ramius. I think it's pretty easy. I've seen so many movies at this point that they're throwing a lot of cues out there that tip their hand a little too much, in my opinion.
Right.
But that just might be because I've seen this movie before and I kind of knew the general plot, but I was very, very much noticing the breadcrumbs they were leaving. When they do a close up on the cook after talking about who the saboteur is, I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
I mean, fuck, come on. But Jack Ryan is always there's this little leapfrog game they're playing where, the Captain Ramius is doing a thing that seems confusing to us as an audience, and then Jack Ryan is figuring it out. And kind of explaining to us why the captain might be doing this thing.
So if you haven't seen this film, the Hunt for Red October's plot is essentially thus. In 1984, at the very height of the Cold War, the Soviets have created a method of submarine propulsion that renders their nuclear missile subs undetectable to sonar, giving them first strike capabilities with no way to counter them. The Red October is the first sub of this class to launch and is helmed by the Russians' legendary Captain Marko Ramius. However, shortly after the sub launches, Moscow orders their entire fleet to sea in an apparent effort to find Ramius and the Red October. The United States, alarmed by the intelligence they've received about the sub's capabilities and fearful of what may happen with this weapon in the hands of a renegade captain, dispatch CIA analyst Jack Ryan to determine the true purpose of Ramius's going AWOL, which could be anything from defection to starting World War III. And I was wondering when I was watching this, that latter part, because I think in the novel it's a bit more of a mystery of what actually is he intending to do.
Gotcha.
Is he actually a renegade? Is he a madman? Is he a communist extremist that wants to destroy the West and thinks that the USSR is just pussyfooting around and he's going to take matters in his own hand? Is he defecting? Because the movie kind of resolves that in the first act.
And then the tension all becomes, will he succeed instead of what's he trying to do?
Yeah, you find out what he's doing, who is on his side, who is not on his side, and what they're gonna and I thought that that's one of the great scenes in the film is that wardroom scene where they get rid of Tim Curry, who is so invaluable as comic relief in this movie. They boot him out, and then you find out that like these are essentially kind of his adoptive sons, and they're all intensely loyal to him, but they also have a bone to pick with the old man because he put a little pepper on the ball at the Moscow, and they're like, well, why did you do that? But by that scene, you know exactly what the stakes are, and the drama is, are the Americans going to figure it out in time? Because it's in their national interest to sink this guy before he gets anywhere near the American coast.
Yeah, and the Russians are trying to encourage him to do that.
And it's in the Russians' national interest to have the Americans help in that. And there's this like multi-layer game of like spycraft and diplomacy. Like I really love the sparring match that the national security advisor has with the Russian diplomat, and like how that's like its own little 5-act play.
That jelly bean scene is too much, man. It's too much.
Yeah,
cracks me up.
Yeah, And then by the end of the movie, when it's all resolved, and he's like, "Oh, there's this other one thing. We haven't heard from this." And he's like, "Yuri, you've lost another submarine." It's just, I fucking love it so much.
Yeah.
But there's like a thing. It's and believe it or not, it's like a slightly simplified version of the plot of the book, because the book there's a lot more of like cooperation between like the British fleet and the American fleet, kind of working together in a very NATO way, with like their bases in Greenland to kind of like, and this is just, it's just all the American did everything, and it's all in response to the Russian stuff. But you gotta make a couple shortcuts to bring a book to the film.
Yeah.
What did you think about Sean Connery's performance?
When the first time they show Sean Connery, he's like, he comes into play right away, right? He's the first character that they show. Mm-hmm. And he's speaking Russian, and I'm like, oh no. Like I said, the Egyptian Spaniard's going to try and speak Russian.
With a Scottish accent.
Right. And here's the thing. I don't know how good or bad his Russian accent is. I have to imagine it's at least as good as bad as Alec Baldwin's Sean Connery is later in this film.
Right.
But I thought Sean Connery was excellent in this movie. And once they get past him speaking Russian and just allay all my fears about that, I was in. And I was on board with Captain Ramius.
It's funny because, like, I read a lot of things about people talking about his Russian accent. I don't think he's attempting one. I think this is like Kevin Costner attempting like a Robin Hood accent, or an English accent, I should say. There's no Robin Hood accent, or a Boston accent. It's like he takes a pass at it, but then like at a certain point in the movie, he's just Sean Connery. Yeah. And he's just doing this stuff and giving his accent a little slap that it needs. And I think that I like. And it's really smart that they do go away from it, because I think he would really. I thought he struggled with some of that Russian, but I don't know. There is something to it. Like, when I think of Sean Connery's performances, he's not often great. He's like a great James Bond, because he's just kind of playing this suave and sly guy, and he's really good in like kind of big budget action movies because he's just playing Sean Connery. Mm-hmm. But there is something great to him. Like, I love his little quiet scenes where he has with Jack Ryan, where he takes him to task about his naval books. I really like his like speech at the end as they're cruising into Americas, where he's talking with Sam Neill about what their dreams of going to America is going to be like. I mean, it's really good, and he just completely effortlessly sells this mastery at his task. And like, you look at this guy and it's like, yeah, I have no problem believing 300 dudes would cram into a metal tube and follow this guy unto death.
Yeah, there's a quiet confidence that he portrays in most of his stuff. Yeah. That he's got a strength of character as an actor, and I think that comes through in every role. And like you said, I don't think he acts very much. I think he says lines, and I think he moves around the stage, and he works with the camera, but he's not really acting. He's just being Sean Connery, which is enough. Is like, when you're that guy,
suits the role very well.
Sure, just do it.
So I want to talk about this $20,000 hairpiece.
Oh, God.
Allegedly, he went behind John McTierman's back and had these prop guys add a ponytail to it.
What the fuck? We just covered Waterworld, where Kevin Costner is spending millions on digital effects and flying a toupee in from Brazil or wherever the fuck. What is it with these actors and the vanity?
There's a certain age a man gets where you got to either yield to the inevitable, or you try to go full denial. And apparently so I guess John McTiernan is furious, but he had like gone to the production and like, gone behind his back. And also he's like a very powerful, influential actor. And like they did the first 2 days of filming, and Jean Dubont, what's this guy's name? The cinematographer, Jean Dubont. He was watching dailies with John, and I guess Sean was over his shoulder, and he's like, your ponytail looks like this little limp dick. and in his Dutch accent, and like the rest of the crew, like that inside joke took off, and they were like everyone teasing. So like after 3 days of filming, Sean Connery agreed to have the ponytail cut off, and they had to redo all of his scenes from those 3 days.
Is that a Russian thing? Is a ponytail?
I don't
Russian
think any branch of the
sub-commander?
Russian military would tolerate a ponytail.
No,
Like
that just seems like a bad idea from the jump.
maybe an 18th century
Yes.
like Russian submarine would countenance something like that, a clubbed ponytail. But and I guess that's why, because like that's why it cost $20,000. The joke is that like, yeah, it's a it's a nice wig, but it cost us a lot of money to reshoot and redo and do all
Gotcha.
this stuff.
Okay.
But otherwise, it's a hell of a hairpiece.
Yeah, I wouldn't even guess that it was a hairpiece, frankly.
But it's funny. I thought he's really good. He's got really good chemistry with Alec Baldwin. But it's also interesting that like the protagonist antagonist don't meet until like late in the third act.
Yeah.
It's all like intellectual and at a remove, which feels very much like spycraft.
Sure.
You're making moves and stuff, and the other person's making moves, and you hope things meet in the middle, or don't. And I thought that was the way they did that was really excellent.
And I think they've got great chemistry there between Sam Neill and Captain Ramius.
Yeah.
I don't even know Sam Neill's character's name, but he's
Borodov.
sure. He's also fantastic in this.
Yeah,
It's like slightly
he's,
suspicious of his captain, but willing to go along. And then I love the moments where the captain will just give him a look, and he'll be like, "Ah, I see what's going on." Like especially that one ping only that thing.
Yeah.
That's a really good scene. That Morse code scene is maybe my favorite scene in the whole movie.
Oh yeah, and he also does like he sells a lot because like Captain Ramis just doesn't ever react. Like we talked about how like Jack Ryan is freaking out when they dove to 1,000 meters deep. But there's things that Ramis does that scares the other sub drivers. But he never, ever, like when he's going plus 45 seconds in Red Route 1, there's like just this is what I think is like, Sean Connery was really good. Like he had this like little, like you can tell that he's keeping an internal track in his own mind. And when he finally gives the order to move, like there's almost like this, like he himself doesn't know that kind of worries that he's fucked up. There's like a tremble to his lips or a hesitation where he's just kind of like flying by the seat of his pants, but you'll never know that. And then there's always Sam Neill, like when the other submariners are freaking out about what the fuck's going on, to be like, hey, you know what, boys, this is all training exercise. If they were trying to kill us, we'd be dead, right?
Right.
And what the fuck did they know? They're a bunch of green recruits, conscripts. It's not a volunteer Navy.
I mean, trained to
and
think that their military organization is infallible. So of course, how could they possibly withstand the might?
They're serving under a legend, a hero, a guy who's trained every other captain in the Russian submarine service. So, and I think they continue to do smart. You talking about the transition between Russian and English. I think I've seen a couple other movies do this since, but this is the first one where they had this guy speaking Russian and they zoom in and zoom in and zoom in on his mouth, and then they flip to English. And I didn't know this until I just did research, but they flipped on the word Armageddon, which is the same in both English and Russian.
Okay. Nice.
So there's like even like this is like a maximum clever scene. And I don't know, like I think this movie would have been effective with, Russian with Russian subtitles. If you want to play a bunch of English, Australian and Scottish actors to, do bad Russian accents, that's fine too. But it's a great way to blend like the realism versus like accessibility to audiences. And then they also never break it, because when the Americans and Russians first meet, that's reverses and they're speaking Russian because of fucking course they would, except for some of them, are bilingual because it's wise to know the ways of one's enemy. So I
like
just think
the
that's
concept
brilliant.
of that shot better than I like the execution of it. I think the zoom in is a little weird. Yeah. And I've seen
but you
this
got to do something, right?
Absolutely, you have to do something. And I don't know what I would do in place of it. It just feels strange to me.
It is stagey for sure, because it's definitely an affectation.
Oh yeah, it absolutely breaks that fourth wall, and you're looking at a shot that's intentionally shot to make you understand or feel something. The other movie that I've seen that did this extremely well is 13th Warrior. I don't know if you saw that Antonio Banderas movie, where he's learning a new language around a campfire, and they're just kind of cutting back and forth between him and a bunch of other people who speak a language he doesn't speak, and he's just picking things up. And over the course of this 1 minute montage, maybe, you come to understand that he's coming to understand that language, and then the rest of the movie is just filmed in English. And I thought that was really expertly done too, but it took more time, and it's a different thing, right? He's not learning a new language here. It's just, this is a very fourth wall breaky kind of thing.
Yeah, I wonder if you could do like like if they're talking on the phone, you know, they got those underwater telephones, and like on one end it's Russian, and then when they hang up it's English, and then like I don't think the audience would even know, because this drew a lot of attention to what they were doing.
It does, yeah.
But I thought it again. It's very stagey. It's very noticeable, but I thought it's a pretty slick way, especially when I found out they pivoted on the Armageddon word.
And I'm happy they did it too, because I didn't really want to hear Sean Connery doing mediocre to bad Russian for the rest of the movie.
Oh no, for sure. I think another thing that was interesting is that I mentioned that like the Hunt for Red October novel has got a lot of the details that this movie is missing, but this movie does a good way of suggesting those details, which is both rewarding for a book fan and also I think like get things across subliminally. Like when you're introduced to the sonar operators, especially Jonesy, you kind of get with this, like they're telling this humorous story about him fucking up with like playing Paganini or some kind of opera stuff through the boat's sonar system, and you kind of get an idea that he's unorthodox and weird and kind of bookish and like maybe smarter than you would give credit for, like enlisted seaman. And they also pay that off with like, so he's got this on his service record. And then when the sub disappears off his scope and he's like, and I thought I heard singing, like that feeds into this commanding officer is kind of like, is Jonesy just kind of crazy or what? The way they characterize the subboat captains, like they have these big oversized glasses. They kind of look brainy and nerdy and not like John Wayne, which reflects the fact that like, to be a nuclear submarine captain, you have to have a college, not only a college degree, but they send you to like a nuclear physicist school.
Yeah, it's
where
intense.
You're trained. It's a very intense program, and these people are very smart and very highly educated, and they're not like balls and bluster. They're very quiet and bookish and precise and intelligent. And I felt like Scott Glenn, with his performance and the costuming, you get all, even if you don't know it, like, oh, this isn't like your big dumb meathead, ballsy, military guy.
In contrast to Sean Connery's hardly acting in any of his movies, I think Scott Glenn,
right?
Yeah, because he's the dad in Leftovers. He's Kevin Garvey Sr.
Kevin Garvey,
and he's a lunatic in that. He's totally different. So I really appreciated seeing him, not like, it doesn't feel like he's a ton younger, but also it feels like his character is so much more reserved.
Yeah. And they do a lot of other show not tell, like when you first see the Russian admiral of the fleet and he's walking in to his office and he's like, people are saluting him and giving him all these honors, and he says, yeah. And he sits down and like he's getting, and like this guy's pouring coffee, he's not giving a shit, and then his eyes light up when he sees Marco's letter. Just like that, like 60, they're not telling you, this isn't a big like cut to high command of Russia tearing their hair out and ordering, like they cut from that, him spilling his tea, to the NATO forces saying like, holy shit, what is Russia doing? They're scrambling their whole fleet. They tell you the situation right then and there.
And then Jack Ryan goes, for the people who didn't quite pick up on it, or it just adds more information that we need later in the movie, which I liked.
Right. And I think Jack Ryan, they did a very good job of characterizing him, where he's kind of young, arrogant, hot-headed, but very, very smart. They gave him this characterization of this fear of flying, which feeds in. They had little breadcrumbs about like, what is this guy's deal? That then when like Fred Thompson comes in as the admiral on the Enterprise and explains to him his service record in like 15-20 seconds, like it just keeps on adding layers and depths of detail to his character. And then it gives you him a personal arc. because he's this uptight guy, his fear of flying, maybe a little bit of a control freak, and he goes through this crazy experience, and then on the way flying back home, he's sleeping like a baby. It's just little shit like that I think elevates this movie and makes it like just a really, really entertaining and exciting, yarn.
Yeah. So real quick, I want to switch tracks here to some of the technical production details. This is a movie that came out in 1990. And for people who maybe either were not alive or not a movie watching age, back then there was not a lot of digital effects you could do. And so a lot of what you're seeing, the vast majority, like, yeah, you could edit films like computers and do compositing and stuff, but you're not getting effects. And so like when you see a deck where Sean Connery is walking on the top of a sub in an ocean, a lot of that is going to be real construction. They had essentially a full-size submarine above the waterline that they had built, so that these people could walk around on top, and that came in super handy. I don't know, in 1990 you could have done this any other way, like evacuating that crew off of that sub.
Oh yeah,
you needed this full-scale model.
Sure.
And I was curious how they did that because, the thing is so old. But yeah, I guess it was just they built a lot of shit. They had 5 studios or 5 sets that they built, or I guess lots that they were using, where they built like the insides of submarines and stuff, because you can't really film inside a real submarine, whether it's in dry dock tight or anything, because you can't move around. Like they're almost like the ISS or something, or a space shuttle in how cramped they are. And Sean Connery,
for very similar reasons.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very expensive space is at a premium in those situations. So yeah, I even saw interviews with Sean Connery where he was talking about how hard it was to work, even in the sets that they built, because they wanted to, realistically model what a submarine might feel like, but leave enough room to, pull out walls and get shots they need. And he said it was very claustrophobic, and I can understand that. Although I think I'd be pretty good on a submarine. I have a little bit of claustrophobia, but I can go for long times not seeing, I think I could go for a while not seeing dry land.
Right.
My environment, I'm not too worried about that. But I don't know. I spend most of my time in a basement, so.
I've always fantasized about like that. If I served in a branch of the military, submariners seem like it's the coolest job and suits my personality type.
Pretty cool.
Because the other thing is, it's also known as like, it's harsh because like you're out to sea, especially on a nuclear, like what they call the boomers, the nuclear missile subs. Your mission is to go out into the ocean and disappear for 6 months at a time.
Yeah.
And then you go back in the port and you switch out crew with the B team, and then they do it for 6 months and you go back. But like those 6 months, you're going to have very limited access to like media, family and friends. But to make up for that, the Navy like goes all out, and like you have like lobster dinners and like food like you'd be on a cruise line. They have huge libraries of like back in the day is VCR tapes and records and CDs, and now I'm sure it's like even more gonzo with digital. But like video game stuff, like they because you're deprived a lot. Like you have to they space is a premium, so most enlisted men what they call like hot bunk. Where like you share a bed with another person, and when you go to sleep, it's probably still warm from them getting up because they don't have the space for everyone to have their own, but I like, when I look at those trade-offs, like you get a lot more freedom. There's a lot more like, I guess the like, obviously personal fitness and grooming standards are a lot laxer on the boats.
Sure. Can't have a lot of the on a boat.
A lot of the hierarchical bullshit is not as strictly enforced because everyone's taking it seriously. You're fucking 500 feet below the waters. If someone fucks up, you're dead.
And I think you have a fair amount of downtime too. It's not like you're constantly on duty, right? Because you may be, the technician, like that mechanic, right? The engineer, whatever he is. He's most of the time not going to be doing much of anything. He might be supervising the repair of something if it breaks, but he's there just in case.
Right.
So it probably has a lot of downtime.
Yeah.
I think an aircraft carrier would also be pretty sweet to be on.
Yeah.
Because then you get that land and sea sort of thing.
Sure.
Or
Plus there's
air
lots of
sea,
space. There's lots of space on an aircraft carrier to get away.
Yeah.
unlimited fresh hot water for showers, because the nuclear reactors. Like, there's a lot of attractive things about a nuclear aircraft carrier too.
Sure. Some of the other details on the production is this thing had a $30 million budget, and I guess the production was pretty on budget, so no big surprises other than maybe the $20,000 hairpiece.
Now, every time you see that kind of budget with a film that gets this much participation from the U.S. military, the actual budget of this film was probably 3 or 4 times that, because the Navy loaned them the USS Enterprise, they loaned them the USS Dallas, they loaned them this frigate, and like, you know, for weeks at a time. Lots of the extras are actually submarine officers and enlisted crewmen.
Nice.
Because like I read that the Navy was hoping that this would do for the Navy or do for submarine recruitment what Top Gun did for like pilot and aircraft.
I fucking knew you were gonna say that.
Yeah,
because of course it did.
But I don't know that it actually did do that, but that was what they're hoping. So they gave them lots and lots of free support, but yeah, still, I mean, $30 million. It looks incredible.
It's so much harder to do for submarines or boats of any kind, right? Because like,
sure,
you know, with Top Gun, you're flying at Mach speeds and like doing loops and flybys and shit. You're not doing much of that with subs. Although there are a couple of really cool scenes that we'll talk about. But this thing made $200 million globally, so easily. It
was like the number one movie of the year, wasn't it?
It was or like number 6 in box office terms. But yeah, I don't know. Dances with Wolves seems like it just crushed everything that year.
Oh, that was the same year. Gotcha.
Yeah. It was actually nominated for 3 Oscars. It was nominated for Best Sound, Best Film Editing, Best Sound Effects Editing. It won on Best Sound Effects Editing, but it was beat by Dances with Wolves for everything else.
I'm actually somewhat surprised that Sean Connery didn't get like a nod for supporting actor, because he's got huge name recognition, made a lot of money for Hollywood, and this is like a legitimate good role that he's got, you know, from a nuts and bolts, you know, steak and potatoes kind of acting way.
Yeah.
Did you see how they filmed the underwater scenes? Because I thought that was very interesting.
How they filmed them? No.
Yeah,
I assume they were models, but
they were models, but they were not underwater. They had these things on computer-controlled rigs. Like the Red October was mounted to 12 different wires that allow it to tilt and roll and like turn. And they suspended these in these enormous tanks that they filled full of fog, like some kind of particle smoke. And they filmed through that, and that's how they got... I saw Roger Ebert bitching about the underwater being dark and murky, but like... That's what it looks like that deep in the ocean, and I thought it gave it like a really creepy, spooky, kind of ghostly feel, to see like these massive machines so close to one another, but the other one doesn't know that the other's there. Like it really added tension, and that technique saved them a lot of money, gave them a lot of control. Also, like they could only film it from one direction, because the tank wasn't set up for they could turn around. So anytime like you got the Red October going left to right instead of right to left, they just film it the one way and flip it.
Yeah.
But I thought they looked really that technique they use looks exactly like what I'd think a submarine underneath the water would look like.
Yeah.
With very little compositing. The only time I saw the compositing being kind of sloppy is when they try to put in like those countermeasures, the bubblers.
Oh, okay.
Or some of the like undersea mountain range stuff looked a little, and then all of the blue screen, or what do they call that?
Final scene floating on the river.
The rear projection shit. Yeah. All
bad.
That stuff. Pretty bad. Yeah.
But it's what are you gonna do?
I think they're filming day for night or even on a stage, and they're compositing it, and it's 1990, but that stuff really jumped out at on the vert. The other thing that's really disappointing, and I rented the UHD version of this movie. Man, digital formats cannot do gradients, and a lot of the underwater stuff was really bad because for that reason. Like you can see just giant banding of colors and stuff, and if you see that in film, it's much smoother. So that was kind of, you know, disappointing when I was watching it on a streaming copy, but what are you gonna do? I want to talk about how accessible this movie I felt like made submarine warfare tactics, because I think the average person, when they think of submarines, they think of like pinging and shooting torpedoes and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
But here it's like you've got this full spectrum. You got like aircraft deploying sonar buoys and forming sonar nets. They talk about the sub's blind spots, that like when it's moving forward, its engines and its propeller makes noise so it can't hear anything behind it. So that's like, you know, getting on your six and staying there is a big part of like, you know, submarine warfare.
I assumed that wouldn't be true for this Caterpillar drive that they have.
I think you are correct, except for it's something about like the submarine's sonar is in its nose, so the entire hull like hides, like there is a very narrow spectrum where they can't hear. And also,
why wouldn't they also put sonar in the back on this particular ship?
That's a good question, because this is fictitious. Like there is no magnetic drive, and it does have screws. The other thing you're supposed to understand is I think a lot of this, they get like towed sonar arrays that are like they actually release on like long stringers that go behind it.
They mentioned
I don't know how that yeah, but like because it can interfere with the screws and whatnot. But the other thing is the American submarines are just very, very quiet. Like if they're like when they go into zero silent, they're going to silent running, like they're holes in the ocean.
Yeah.
So even if you have like active sonar, so there's a difference in active sonar, which is what the ping you hear. That's like that's like seeing everything in high def color. But what mostly submarines do is try to make passive contact, which is they're listening for engine noises, crew, so like, you know, a cook dropping a pot in the galley can be heard for miles and miles. Thing like sloppy things like that, they try to, you know, pick up and distinguish between the background noise.
Singing and the Russian national anthem can be heard.
Right. And a lot of the technological sophistication in like the last 50 years of submarines has been in that, like how much noise you put out versus how sensitive your ears can be. Because if you can master both those technologies, you're invisible and you know everything you need to launch a torpedo and you don't have to do the active sonar.
I imagine there's probably a lot of AI involved now, with filtering out, you know, whale sounds, magma streams or whatever the hell they're talking about.
And in this era, they were just, they even mentioned that they had this new sophisticated computer that was based on a seismology experiment.
Yeah.
But yeah, like more and more, like obviously it's probably even better than a trained sonarman.
Oh, yeah.
And then they like the crazy Ivans, where the Russian skippers would stop and do a slow turn to like turn their most sensitive equipment to try to detect someone from behind, and like what a cat and mouse game that is.
My absolute favorite move in this entire thing is when he bum rushes the torpedoes that are coming at them before they can get their arming mechanisms online.
Yes.
And they just bounce, effectively off the hull. I thought that was super cool because I didn't even realize that was a thing you could do.
And it was such a baller move, is because Ramis just refused to explain it himself. He's just like, I taught the book on this shit. I know the safety protocols, and I also know this is a one-shot thing because this other guy is going to be ripping them out, so this never happens to me again, which ends up dooming him.
Yeah.
Which that's the other thing, is like I know the climax of the book does not end in an accidental submarine or a torpedo detonation. I'm pretty sure the Red October in the book. You know what? I'm not going to spoil it. If for anyone who wants to read the book, because it's a great one. And like I said, the book goes even to crazier detail, because the one I was talking to you is like in the early stages when the Russians are like trying desperately to get ahead of Ramius. One of those attack boat skippers is running their reactor at like 110%, and Clancy spends a whole chapter explaining how like a tiny manufacturing defect in the reactor that only manifests itself when it's running at 110%, like loosens a washer that gets stuck in a coolant pipe, which then causes the reactor to do this. And the chief engineer is trained to scram his reactor this way, but like it's kind of like a mini Chernobyl that's happening 1,000 feet below the ocean. And as a result of all these things, like like the chief engineer does the thing he's trained for, but it's wrong in this particular instance, and that like causes the reactor to literally melt its way through the floor of this fucking submarine. And then the captain, who thinks it's like a normal scram operation, does something that ends up flipping the submarine upside down. And like the whole chapter like details exactly what happens to that submarine as it passes its structure, like crush depth, and it's like really cool. But like, where does that fit in the movie? But there's like a dozen scenes like that in the book where it's just insane technical detail of why the thing's happening. Like there might even be, I'm pretty sure that thing where Ramius turns into the torpedo and charges at it is like done in like crazy technical manual type detail too.
Yeah, I think those scenes for the book, serve to raise the tension because when people are doing these maneuvers, the things that could go wrong, like I mentioned, being like the crush depth stuff. When you're going deeper into the ocean, how does that affect the submarine and all that? And what should we be thinking when he's doing that? The movie, I don't think needs that stuff. It's not as much about like that tension as it is the tension of, is this man going to succeed in the defection that he's trying to pull off?
And it's set up like a pressure cooker. Like I read that like the average shot length in this movie is 7 seconds, which, without you even detecting it, just gives it this kind of relentless feel. Now, obviously there's a bunch of long shots, but like there's also just a lot of like 1 second, cut to this, cut to this, cut to this guy's frantic face. And I think they did a good job of showing like what a pressure cooker this situation could be. Like, they had Fred Thompson's Admiral, like after, the Russians and Americans had a near run and it damaged one of the American airplanes, and it goes to land on the Enterprise, and it, just belly flops and destroys itself. And he says, this is going to keep happening. And someone's going to die. Someone's going to get sloppy. Someone's going to shoot a shot. And then we're going to be in World War III. Like the psychological and physical pressures of when you're, two superpowers doing this crazy operation in the middle of the Atlantic. I felt like they just really sold that, like that tension, but also the professionalism, that like, this is all fucking crazy, but everyone's there. This is what they've trained for, literally in some of their cases, all their lives. So it feels very professional and competent despite the craziness. Yeah.
And all that tension, I thought, was interesting given like the political situation here. The Americans desperately want to get their hands on this technology, and they almost need to, because this is a first strike weapon that they've tried to build and failed to build. They need to know how this thing was made so that they can either A, build their own deterrence, or B, at least be able to maybe figure out how to detect these things. And throughout the movie, the question is brought up, how is this going to work? Because like we need the Russians to believe that we don't have this thing. And they use some brilliant stuff with like a radiation scare and everything to get the crew off the boat. But then you've got a crew who sees that the boat went under the water, and would assume, okay, he's going to scuttle this thing at the end. But then there's a battle that happens, and he clearly hasn't scuttled it. And then they see this big explosion of the boat. So maybe they think, okay, the boat exploded. But the Russians would know that their own boat was in proximity to this. And they would also know that their own boat is missing after that. And they know that the Americans have another boat within proximity to this entire battle. And they should be able to see what's happening here. And there's this like line somewhere that they're dancing on both sides, just like right over the edges of. Yeah. And I think ultimately it shakes out in a satisfying way, but man, you really have to have some balls to sit in front of that diplomat and say, we got no idea what happened to that boat.
Oh yeah. Well, that's the thing is
we
like,
had our most advanced ship out there monitoring the ocean from like a few hundred yards away. We got no fucking idea what happened to it.
It's real deep, Dimitri. Who the hell can even say? But that's the funny thing is like, all those little duels between the NSA, the National Security Advisor, and the Russian diplomat, the thing that's unspoken is like they both know they're full of shit at every step of the way.
Yeah.
But it's like, what can you know in your bones what's happening, but what can you prove? What can you go into a Security Council of the UN and actually lay like projector slides and actually, because you're going to accuse us of stealing your boat. Every 300 sailors testified that they got off the Red October. Marco Ramius fought us, and then they scuttled the thing, and he's going to get the hero. I mean, that's one of. I think the resolution of this plot is so fucking smart, because the other interesting thing about the Russian boats is they do have political officers. Like, imagine like on an American vessel, if there was someone there that you only had one party, like the Democratic Party. It's the only legal party, and you had an officer that's whole job is to make sure the captain and the officers don't ever do anything that's against the party platform, on pain of execution and death. And how do you get rid of that guy? How do you get rid of the KGB officers who are then that he doesn't even know about, that's there to try to keep the boat from falling in the hands? How do you get the crew off? I think that's so funny. And Tim Curry just does so much heavy lifting.
He's great.
He's such a dope. Like when Ramius does, like, and he's reluctantly like, who said anything about sabotage? He's like, Captain. And then when he says
the run around, it's so good.
Oh, it's so good. And he's like, oh, you'll get the Order of Linen for this. And they cut to Sean Connery. It's just so funny. And the way that so funny.
Sam Neill is coming in there, disagreeing with the captain and agreeing with Tim Curry in order to make him think that, he scored points on this, and now they're going to do it.
Yeah.
It's great. I love it.
It's funny. And like, I love Tim Curry. And this is like one of my favorite roles, because he's just allowed to, be really good and funny, and like the comic relief. There's very little comic relief. There's James Earl Jones kind of like demented glee at Jack Ryan doing something that no politician would ever do. It's like, I told you to speak your mind, Jack, but Jesus, I want to get out of here and leave you alone with this guy. That's really funny. James Earl Jones is really good too, like in a very small role, to just sell like this Admiral Greer, who is one of my favorite characters in the Tom Clancy books, and he's in most of them. But like him just kind of like being the shadowy guy who's, goes there and blows up a missile and says literally, I was never here, and you don't know who I am. And like I just genuinely enjoy the spycraft, and like there's a whole bunch of things like that are microcosms of that diplomat and the NSA guy. That's like where there's conversations like, okay, sure, we all know that this is going to happen, but let's, for the sake of argument, say we want to steal this boat. How would we make it happen? And they talk about all like the impossibility of all, and that just, I think, is really cool. And also like Jack Ryan, who spends half the movie just bemoaning the fact that he's in this situation, then takes these crazy high risks, like when they're trying to transfer him to the Dallas, and they're doing this complicated thing. The helicopter's about to run out of fuel. He ditches himself into the North Atlantic, almost freezes to death, which lands him into the shit list of the captain. So now he's a kind of he's a buckaroo. He's a buckaroo. He's a riverboat gambler. Like, he has his ass pull about the crazy Ivan at the bottom of the hour that was just a coin flip, but it's the advantage he needs. And then Scott Glenn's not even pissed when he gets taken advantage of. He's like, well, you got some balls, kid. All that stuff just, I thought, really worked well for me.
And it makes sense for that character and then the plot overall, because like he's taking these risks not because he's a risk taker, but he has to. I mean, like the unspoken behind the scenes sort of thing here is, if the Americans don't get this boat, they're right back to where they were before the boat even existed, which is not knowing that this fucking thing exists. At least, well, now they know that it exists, but they still have no way to defend against it, right? So Jack Ryan is essentially trying to, by putting himself, at risk here, ensure that America has a way to defend against this new weapon, this new super weapon that could wipe them off the face of the planet before they even have time to react.
And they do a good job of showing the stakes for him because they establish, he's got a young family, he's got a kid that's relying on him. He's got a very comfortable career that he enjoys, and he's putting all that on the line for the good of the country and, broadly speaking, the world, because nobody wants World War III, right?
Sure.
So all that stuff, again, they established those stakes in like the first few minutes of the movie.
And I think they do a really great job too with sort of, you talked about all the different things they show about the technical battles of the submarine, but there's something else they do here which is really interesting to me, which is they get the captains to switch ships at some point. Like they get the captain of the Dallas onto the Red October,
right,
captaining that boat, which to me was just a brilliant move. And I don't know if this would be realistic. This is like Patrick Stewart as Jean-Luc Picard going on an away mission.
Sure.
Maybe you don't do that. Maybe you don't put the captain in that danger. But at the same time, it was a really good plot device to get him on that boat. And Sean Connery's in the depths trying to fight this cook who, is a saboteur, and then you've got Alec Baldwin at the controls of this ship at one point, trying to steer it through some pretty complex maneuvers in the middle of a battle. It's just
you don't
really
know how to
good.
steer a boat, especially,
because you're missing your crew.
The whole most things down here don't react too well to bullets. Like you got that, which I think is bullshit. I'm certain you could unload a minigun on any of these submarine, these nuke tubes, and nothing would happen. But maybe, the audience doesn't know that, and it causes a lot of. And that shot, that's a great shot of Jack Ryan panning up, and you see just a rows and rows and rows of death. That is the bulk of these submarines. These missile submarines, they're huge, but it's not for crew space. It's to hold all these fucking continent killers that they're hiding, and both sides have them. But I thought, all that stuff really works well for me. What else? I got a couple other. So there's a couple of apocrypha to this movie that I think this is stuff that I remember from Indiana Jones commentary and maybe some interviews and also some just drunken jokes we used to make. But there's one real fact, which is well attested, which Sean Connery is a sweater. Okay. And whenever he has, this came from the Indiana Jones bonus material, but anytime that you see him from the waist up, he's not wearing pants. If he's wearing a tweed jacket and a hat and you're seeing him from the waist up, he's not wearing pants.
Yeah.
And he's probably got a fan blowing on his junk because the man just is well, I can get this in a few takes, or you can mop me down in between. What do you want to do, boyo? And I thought that I saw in the John McTiernan commentary track for this that he attested that as well. That has not happened. Also, I thought someone made the comment that Sean Connery doesn't stage. So most people, when you have to have a scene in that wardroom where they're eating, you have to do 20 takes. You don't usually eat the food. You pretend to, you spit it out. You take, you stage eat. Because who the hell can eat however many pork chops you'd have to plow through?
Yeah.
But there's something in this scene where you watch Sean Connery and he's just tearing into these pork chops, and there's his lips are greasy and you can kind of see some of the grease running to his beard. I think this is just a joke we made, but I thought as a fact that one of the things is that Sean Connery takes his pants off to act and he refuses to stage eat. You sit in front of him a pork chop, he's going to eat that fucking pork chop.
And so
after
movie,
3 takes, you're going to need another one.
And so in this movie, he's pantsless eating pork chops in this scene where Sam Neill and the rest of them are sitting around, staring at him sort of wide-eyed, right?
Yeah, look at this man just plowing through these pork. Look at it's just impressive. I was kind of shocked that apparently is stuff I just made up in my head because I tried to source it. I tried so hard to watch the commentary track. I read a whole bunch of interviews. I couldn't find. So that's just a joke you and I make.
So the pants thing is true. The pants thing is part of the Indiana Jones Last Crusade commentary.
And I'm almost certain that he would do that move in this movie because those Russian uniforms look hot and this is a cramped set. And, Ramus cannot be sweating like a sex worker in church. So he's probably got his pants off.
Those airship scenes that he's in.
Yes.
Right, in Last Crusade. That's where that commentary is.
Yeah. So that unfortunately is not true. I want to talk about the Gates. Do you have something else? Because I also want to talk about this Gates McFadden detail.
Yeah, do it.
Because this kind of is interesting that like this kind of pairs into that movie we just the documentary Chaos on the Bridge, that you found out that like Gates McFadden had a few notes for the production staff and they fired her over it and replaced her with another doctor. So she filmed this in her gap year, and she agreed to do it because Kathy Ryan is a much bigger part of, like, for example, Patriot Games, which is going to be the next one that they make. So she's like, well, okay, I'll do this. And I guess she had more scenes that they cut. Just essentially, she just walks in and says, Jack, you're going to be late. And she was like signed on to this to do the Patriot Games. Well, they wanted Harrison Ford to be Jack Ryan in this movie, and he was too expensive, so they got Alec Baldwin, who I think is the perfect Jack Ryan. And I'm still pissed off that this didn't work out, because he would have aged into Jack Ryan beautifully, and he would, Jack Ryan would be a much bigger cultural figure had they done this. But then when they wanted him to do Patriot Games, I guess Alec Baldwin hardballed them, and they said, like, I guess one executive remarked, for the money that he's wanted, we could go get Harrison Ford. And then they're like, well, let's go get Harrison Ford. And Harrison Ford agreed to do it. When they did that, they decided, well, since we're recasting Harrison Ford and he's a little bit older, let's recast Kathy Ryan too. So Gates McFadden got fucked out of her much larger role in
by
Patriot
Alec
Games.
Baldwin.
Yes.
That sucks.
So like, poor Miss McFadden seems like she has been like behind the 8 ball on many, many Hollywood situations that is not her fault at all. And I felt really sorry that she got done dirty by that.
Yeah, I mean, she is owed an apology by Alec Baldwin, but also, can I say thank you, Alec Baldwin, for getting her fired from these movies, because we would not have Gates McFadden back in Star Trek: The Next Generation, and we would have maybe had Pulaski for another 7.
Well, she was.
5, 6
I
years,
feel like
so.
The doctor would have been like the chief engineer in season 1. It just been
okay. Yeah.
Just been a new chief medical officer every single time.
Not good.
Yeah, that wouldn't have worked out well.
There's one other scene that I want to talk about that I thought was just really cool, really impressive, and I have to imagine like sudden decompression will do this. The release of this much air, but when that sub blows up, it's a Kalana Lev or something.
Yeah.
That explosion of air coming up from the depths that you see is really fucking impressive. Like, I can't imagine being, in a raft or whatever as those crew members and seeing that happen and just thinking anything other than, oh my God, that's incredible.
Yeah, these went down. There's a couple of, like when the Dallas goes to the deck, emergency blows, like, it is wild to see something that big in real life fly out of the water like that.
Yeah.
Like put whales to shame. And also there's a couple other scenes that, like, when Aramius has to kill the political officer, I thought they did a really good job of showing, like, this political officer has no idea. Like this like confusion and horror of, like, he snapped his neck. So, like, it's not like in the movies where you just lights out. Like, your body still is not done dying, and your brain gets to sit there and enjoy the ride while you can do nothing about it. And, like, how fucking horrific that is.
Yeah.
But the actual shots of, like, the crew struggling in the North Atlantic, and I thought those were just, like, I just loved. I love shit about having to do with the ocean and the dangers of it, and that stuff is just, like I said, pornography to me. So I was eating it up.
You mentioned that political officer. I don't know if this is just a common Russian surname, but his name is Putin. Did they mean to do anything with that? Because I'm thinking like 1990.
No, Putin was like some probably 21-year-old KGB officer just working his way up the ranks at the.
I would have thought, yeah. So it's got to be just, that's a fairly common surname, right?
Yeah, it'd be like if the Russians made a movie about American military and one of their officers was Ronald, like, oh my God, did they know that No, it's just like, you got a name. Huh. Yeah, and this is the high water mark for the Jack Ryan movies. There's not like some of them are okay movies unto themselves, but they are almost universally have nothing to do with the book that they're based on. Huh. They fuck up the characterizations. I don't think Harrison Ford is a particularly good Jack Ryan. Ben Affleck is actually a quite good Jack Ryan, but that was not also a very faithful adaptation of the book that it's based on, and they just never have quite been able to get the characterizations right, and it's just a damn shame that they didn't stick with Alec Baldwin, because he would just aged into that role. They could have just made them all in chronological order, made a shit ton of money. Although I don't know how you adapt a 1,200 page book into a 2-hour movie, like. At some point, some of these, like Patriot Games was they could have done a better job, but some of these games, when they get like too crazy, it's like, what the hell? Clear and Present Danger, holy shit.
I've seen those movies. I don't remember anything about them.
They're just average thrillers, or maybe even below average, but they have Harrison Ford, just kind of elevates it because he's such a big star. And he can do things like, when he points his finger at Doom and says, "God damn you, President, for unconstituting," it seems
Tells
important.
The president, "Get off my plane." Oh wait, no.
That's right.
John Malkovich is in one of those, right? He's like an assassin.
Is Willem Dafoe plays John Clark in one of them?
Okay, that's
which is like that. Yeah, that's like the biggest badass of the John. He's the Amos from The Expanse of the Jack Ryan universe.
I got one more thing that I think I thought was funny. Is that you've got this fancy computer system, right? That's trying to, like, this $40 million computer or whatever that they talk about with the sonar system. And it's all, and you've got this technician at the controls, listening in with his perfectly attuned ears. And then right fucking behind him, you got a dot matrix printer, one of the loudest known machines to man. And hooked up to this $40 million computer, it just seemed like a joke to me that they would put something so loud and obnoxious. That's like, the Russians have to be thinking, I thought there was a sub behind us, and I could have sworn I heard a dot matrix printer. Like, it's so fucking loud.
I know. And it's causing vibrations and all kinds of stuff.
Oh, yeah.
There's that brings me to the point that almost destroys the movie for me and the book. And I only noticed this, this is probably the 12th time I've seen this movie. Jonesy figures out the Red October within 5 minutes of hearing it.
Yeah.
It's entirely possible that all this stuff happened, and what been the smart play for the Americans would be to sink the Russian who defected and then pretend like they don't have the answer and let the Russians just believe that they've got this ace up their sleeve. I mean, but
yeah,
I don't know. But
have it, and they wouldn't have any defense against it either.
Yeah, but if you can detect and if you can hear the boat, because I guess that was the joke about one of the reasons that the Russians didn't bother to go into the ocean. They stayed pretty much in their own territorial waters, is because the Americans they'd literally have an attack boat sunk on the bottom outside their naval bases. As soon as their boomers went out to sea, the Russian attack sub would pick it up and just stay on its tail for their entire cruise. And the Russians, they have, I don't know, there's this stuff that's asserted in the book that I don't know if it's true. But I guess there's a way you can take pictures from the outside of the sub, and what really daring attack boat skippers would get close enough to these Russian subs to take a picture of its hull number. Wow. And then they would keep those kill signs in their bunk room, oh yeah, we got this, and they competed for the newest classes of Russians, that they were so outclassed that whereas the Americans, their Ohio class boats were so quiet that they could go many times, they just parked themselves off major Russian cities for months at a time and no one be the wiser. So I do wonder, what if Jonesy just, tells the fleet how to listen for this thing, and then it's not a big deal, and then you've got an advantage and they don't. But
I mean, I get the impression that he was a special
You're right.
case that he could hear something that maybe other people might not be able to hear.
Right. But maybe he's got golden ears, but also, could you not train that computer? But like I said, I didn't notice that until just this. I'm like, well, he literally figures out the Red October within minutes of meeting it. What the hell? And yeah, he is an exceptional guy, but it's you only need one Einstein to figure out E equals MC squared, and then the whole world knows, right?
Yeah.
But hey, forget I said that. Flash this out of your podcast memory. Go watch the movie and pretend like that's not a huge issue.
No, it's real good. I liked it.
Well, that'll about wrap things up for the Hunt for Red October. We will be back next week here on the Prestige channel to talk about the 1961 movie Hustler, starring Paul Newman and Jackie Gleason. I've never seen this. Jim, you really hyped me up for it though.
Oh yeah, it's one of my favorite Paul Newman movies.
Get a chance to see Paul Newman in his prime? Are you kidding me? So look forward to that. Thanks for watching or listening, however you get this content. And we appreciate it. We'll see you next week for Hustler. Until then, I'm A.Ron.
And I'm Jim.
Later.